3 women from my gym surrounded me, and I couldn't walk away. What happened next changed everything. The gym was quieter than usual that afternoon, the usual clamor of weights and clanging machines softened by the late-hour lull. I was finishing my last set, my arms trembling slightly from the effort, sweat clinging to my hair and skin. The scent of rubber mats and faint perfume mingled in the air, grounding me in the familiar, almost comforting chaos of the place. That's when I first noticed them, 3 women, walking together near the stretching area. They weren't loud or ostentatious, but there was a quiet confidence in the way they moved, a grace that made them impossible to ignore. Each was striking in her own way, age clearly visible in the subtle lines around their eyes, the gentle strength in their posture, but nothing about them screamed vanity. Instead, it was an effortless elegance, like someone comfortable in her own skin and quietly aware of the effect she had on the world. Our eyes met for the briefest moment, and I felt something unfamiliar, a gentle pull, almost magnetic, that made me hesitate mid-motion. They didn't smile overtly, yet the corners of their lips curved in a subtle acknowledgement, almost teasing, as if they knew they'd caught my attention. I felt heat rise to my face and an unexpected flutter in my chest, the kind you don't notice until it's impossible to ignore. One of them, the tallest, with soft brown hair pulled back into a ponytail, walked a little closer, casually adjusting her water bottle on the nearby counter. As she moved past me, her shoulder brushed against mine, barely noticeable, yet enough to leave a lingering warmth, a reminder that she had been there. My hands stilled for a moment as I processed the contact, my mind suddenly hyper-aware of the proximity. The other 2 women were equally poised, one with a quiet intensity in her green eyes, the other with a gentle, almost shy smile that softened her features. They spoke softly to each other, but their voices carried easily across the floor, and I caught snippets of laughter, light, musical, and entirely human. I realized I had been unconsciously holding my breath, drawn in by the rhythm of their presence, the ease with which they moved through the space. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing more than casual attention, the kind you get in a crowded gym. But even as I reached for my towel, I felt a quiet awareness following me, as if they existed in the periphery of my consciousness now. The subtle brush of a hand, the weight of their gaze, the faint trace of perfume, each detail stayed with me, settling like a soft echo in my mind. By the time I finished packing my bag, the curiosity had taken root, tinged with hesitation. Who were they, and why did their presence feel so intentional, so affecting? The gym had always been my routine escape, a place for discipline and solitude, yet suddenly it seemed charged with possibility, a gentle tension that made me wonder what might happen if I lingered, just a little longer, in their orbit. And so, as I walked toward the exit, I couldn't help but notice them again, standing with that same quiet confidence, their eyes meeting mine in a way that felt deliberate. I was aware, for the first time, that this ordinary gym afternoon might be the beginning of something entirely unexpected. The next few days at the gym felt different, almost charged. I noticed them more deliberately now, the 3 women seemed to appear in the spaces I naturally gravitated toward, always nearby but never overtly imposing. There was a rhythm to their presence, almost like an unspoken choreography, and I caught myself adjusting my routine, both curious and slightly self-conscious. One morning, as I was stretching on the mats near the window, the woman with soft brown hair casually unrolled her mat beside mine. She didn't say anything at first, simply positioning herself with that same effortless grace. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching the subtle highlights in her hair and tracing the delicate lines of her face. For a moment, I was acutely aware of the proximity, the warmth radiating from her body, the faint floral scent she carried. My muscles, still tight from the workout, seemed to tremble with something other than exertion. The other 2 women were close by too, one adjusting a kettlebell with precise movements, the other sipping water while observing a stretching video on her phone. They spoke softly to each other, occasional laughter spilling into the room, a sound that drew my attention like a gentle magnet. Even without addressing me directly, I felt included in their rhythm, part of the small, private orbit they had created around themselves. It wasn't long before small, seemingly incidental touches began. The tallest one, brushing past me to reach a weight, let her fingers graze my shoulder. The contact was brief, almost accidental, yet it sent a subtle warmth through my chest and lingered longer in my mind than it did on my skin. Another day, while adjusting my form during a plank, I felt the light pressure of a guiding hand on my back, her touch firm yet careful, correcting my posture while simultaneously creating a quiet intimacy. I found myself noticing details I hadn't before, the way the green-eyed woman's lips curved into a soft smile when she was focused, the gentle cadence of the one with the shy smile as she laughed, the delicate way they moved through the space, attuned to one another yet aware of me. My heartbeat picked up in a way that felt both thrilling and unnerving, a mix of admiration, curiosity, and something I didn't yet fully understand. I tried to rationalize it. After all, gyms were social spaces, and people often ran into the same faces multiple times. Yet the subtle intensity of their attention, the way they seemed to anticipate my movements, lingered in my thoughts long after I had left the gym. Even when I walked out into the crisp evening air, the memory of their presence clung to me like a soft shadow. By the end of the week, the quiet tension had become undeniable. I was no longer simply observing them, I was aware that they were observing me in return, their glances lingering just enough to be noticed, their smiles carrying an unspoken warmth. It wasn't overt, but the feeling was electric, a quiet, playful push and pull that made me both excited and hesitant. I realized then that the gym, once just a routine in my day, had subtly shifted into a space of possibility, a place where curiosity, attraction, and unspoken desire could grow, and where I was no longer entirely in control of my own attention. It started innocuously enough, a shared water break near the gym fountain. I was wiping my face with a towel when the woman with soft brown hair leaned lightly against the counter, offering a small, easy smile. "You've been consistent this week," she said casually, her tone warm but not overly familiar. I nodded, feeling a mix of embarrassment and intrigue. There was something in her presence, steady, attentive, that made it hard to look away. Soon, the green-eyed woman joined, balancing her yoga mat under one arm. "We were wondering if you're trying the new strength circuit," she asked, tilting her head slightly, curiosity and subtle amusement in her expression. Her voice was calm but carried an underlying rhythm that drew me in. I found myself explaining my routine, fumbling slightly over words I normally wouldn't stumble on, acutely aware of the way their gazes lingered. The third, the woman with the shy smile, hovered just a step behind, listening and occasionally offering quiet encouragement. There was a softness in her eyes that made her approachable, yet an intelligence that made her entirely compelling. I noticed how her fingers lightly adjusted her ponytail as she leaned forward, as if unconsciously inviting me into the space between us. Every small gesture, a tilt of the head, a lingering look, the subtle way their bodies angled toward me, was charged with a warmth that was impossible to ignore. Conversation shifted naturally from workout tips to small anecdotes about our days. The tallest woman laughed softly when I mentioned a minor mishap with a kettlebell, her laughter light and genuine. It wasn't flirtation, exactly, but there was a playful undertone, a teasing ease that made me feel included, seen, and, perhaps most importantly, understood. As they shared brief stories from their lives, one about a challenging project at work, another about an unexpectedly quiet morning at home, I realized how layered they were. Their confidence was tempered by subtle vulnerability, moments of hesitation that made them feel entirely human. It struck me then that this was different from casual social encounters. These were three women who could see beyond the surface, and somehow, they were letting me in. And slowly, I began to reciprocate, revealing small pieces of myself I rarely shared. A passing comment about my struggle to balance work and gym routines turned into a quiet confession about feeling isolated in a new city. The shy smiling woman reached out ever so lightly, her fingertips brushing my forearm as if to reassure me. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a jolt of warmth through my chest, an unspoken connection that needed no words. By the time we parted that afternoon, I felt a subtle, almost intoxicating mix of exhilaration and hesitation. I was drawn to them, not just to their beauty, but to the layers of experience, humor, and quiet wisdom that made each of them so compelling. And while there was no overt romantic declaration, the silence between words, the pauses, the fleeting touches, and the lingering glances were charged with something unspoken, curiosity, intrigue, and the beginning of desire. For the first time, I left the gym not just physically exhausted, but emotionally stirred, aware that this slow, subtle entanglement was only just beginning. That afternoon, the gym felt smaller somehow, the usual hum of machines and chatter muted against the intensity of the moment. I was finishing a set of stretches near the corner by the rowing machines when I realized I wasn't alone. The three women were there, almost deliberately, forming a semicircle around me, their presence warm and insistent. There was no aggression, just an undeniable closeness that made leaving feel complicated. "Hey," the tallest one said, her voice calm but firm, "you're doing that form wrong. Let me show you." Her hands hovered near mine as she gently guided my posture. The contact was light, instructive, but I could feel the heat from her body, the warmth of her proximity pressing softly against my awareness. My shoulders stiffened in hesitation, caught between instinctive respect for personal space and the subtle magnetic pull I felt toward her. The green-eyed woman stepped closer on my other side, her gaze attentive, almost measuring, her posture confident yet relaxed. She adjusted her own stretching mat so it was near mine, her movement casual, but the unspoken message was clear: I wasn't going anywhere until we'd engaged. Her hand brushed against my arm when she leaned down to demonstrate a stretch, the fleeting contact leaving a quiet, lingering spark in its wake. The shy smiling woman lingered just behind, her voice soft, almost conspiratorial. "You should join us for a quick cool-down chat," she suggested, a gentle nudge in her tone. There was playfulness there, but also a subtle weight, a sense that this was intentional. I hesitated, feeling the walls of the cornered space, not literally trapped, but emotionally contained by their attention and presence. I could feel my heartbeat accelerate, the mix of embarrassment, curiosity, and attraction swirling inside me. It was intoxicating and unnerving all at once. Each brush of skin, every guiding hand, the way they angled their bodies slightly toward me, created a quiet tension I couldn't easily ignore. My rational mind reminded me to be polite, to maintain boundaries, yet every fiber of my being was acutely aware of the magnetic pull drawing me into their circle. And yet, there was something tender beneath the tension, a deliberate care in the way they moved, a softness in their smiles that balanced the intensity of the moment. Their eyes met mine with patient expectation, as though silently asking, "Are you willing to step into this space with us?" It wasn't pressure, it was invitation, a quiet challenge that tugged at my curiosity and stirred emotions I hadn't anticipated feeling in a gym. By the time our stretch session concluded, I realized I had experienced something unusual, the thrill of being observed, the gentle intimacy of deliberate proximity, and the stirrings of desire restrained by politeness and awareness of social boundaries. Their presence lingered with me even as I stepped away, the warmth of contact and the softness of their attention pressing against the edges of my consciousness. Walking to the exit, I felt a mixture of exhilaration and hesitation, a realization that the simple act of being near them had shifted my emotional equilibrium. The gym, once a neutral space, had become charged with possibility, each subtle touch and glance carrying weight, each laugh and glance adding to a growing emotional tension I was both eager and nervous to explore. It was later that week when the gym seemed to transform into a more intimate space, almost as if it sensed the quiet undercurrent of connection between us. After our usual workout, the three women invited me to sit with them on a small bench in the stretching area. It wasn't casual, there was a deliberate comfort in the arrangement, a warmth in their attention that made me feel both seen and safe. Conversation started lightly, with playful remarks about our routines, but gradually shifted into something deeper. The woman with soft brown hair shared a story about balancing a demanding career while raising a teenage child, her voice tinged with quiet exhaustion but also pride. I listened, captivated not just by the story but by the way she spoke, pauses, subtle inflections, the way her hands rested lightly in her lap, suggesting patience and strength. The green-eyed woman followed with a tale of a personal setback she had endured, her tone calm but reflective. There was no need to embellish, the honesty in her voice filled the space. I found myself leaning slightly forward, drawn to the way she carefully chose her words, how her gaze met mine occasionally, inviting understanding without forcing it. The shy smiling woman shared something simpler, yet equally intimate, a small, quiet regret from her past, the kind of detail rarely given to strangers. She laughed softly, almost self-consciously, as she recounted it, and I noticed the gentle warmth in her eyes as she looked at me. Her hand brushed against mine briefly as she passed a water bottle, a fleeting touch that lingered in my awareness longer than the moment warranted. As the stories unfolded, I realized how unusual this felt, not just the closeness, but the ease with which they allowed me to step into their emotional space. I shared a piece of myself in return, talking about the loneliness of living alone in a new city, the uncertainty of navigating adult life, and the small insecurities I usually kept hidden. Their reactions were gentle and affirming. The brown-haired woman's hand briefly rested on my forearm, a silent reassurance, while the green-eyed woman nodded with attentive understanding. The atmosphere shifted subtly with each shared secret. There was no rush, no pressure, just presence, quiet attention, and small, deliberate gestures of comfort. Every touch, every glance, every pause carried weight. I noticed the warmth of their bodies nearby, the slight scent of perfume mixing with the gym's lingering sweat and cleaning solution, and the small intimacies of shared space that made me feel tethered to them emotionally. By the time the session ended, I felt a shift within myself. The playful glances and gentle touches from before had matured into something deeper, a tender curiosity, a desire to understand and be understood, and an unspoken acknowledgement that this connection mattered. The slow burn of attraction was no longer just physical, it had become emotional, layered with trust, respect, and the subtle thrill of vulnerability shared and received. Leaving the gym that evening, I carried the echo of their stories with me. The warmth of contact and quiet intimacy pressed gently against my awareness, a reminder that what had started as playful observation had grown into something profoundly stirring, a connection that neither time nor routine could easily diminish. It was a quiet evening when they suggested grabbing a post-workout smoothie at the small cafe across the street. The idea seemed casual, but as we walked together, I felt the undercurrent of attention, a delicate awareness in every step. The three women fell into an easy rhythm around me, their laughter light but charged with subtle energy, and I realized how much I had been anticipating this moment. We found a corner table bathed in the soft glow of the cafe's overhead lights, the city outside humming quietly behind the glass. Sitting close together, our knees occasionally brushed beneath the table, small accidents that sent warmth spiraling through me. The air smelled faintly of coffee and sweet pastries, mingling with the subtle scents they carried, floral, citrus, hints of vanilla, creating an invisible, intoxicating layer around us. Conversation flowed effortlessly, alternating between light teasing and more personal confessions. The tallest woman spoke about her recent travels, her voice calm yet inviting, her hands expressive as she recounted moments of wonder and exhaustion. The green-eyed woman shared a story about a project at work, her thoughtful pauses emphasizing the pride and vulnerability she felt. Even the shy smiling woman offered insights into her quiet evenings at home, revealing a reflective, tender side I hadn't seen before. As we laughed and shared, the space between us seemed to shrink. I felt their presence more acutely than ever, the warmth of their shoulders brushing mine when we leaned in to speak, the way our hands occasionally touched when passing glasses or plates, subtle yet deliberate. Each contact, fleeting as it was, seemed to linger longer than expected, leaving a quiet tension that both excited and unnerved me. For the first time, the emotional connection was nearly tangible. I noticed the small details, the way the brown-haired woman's fingers lingered on the edge of her glass, the green-eyed woman's eyes holding mine for a heartbeat longer than polite, the shy smiling woman's smile softening whenever I spoke. I felt pulled into their orbit, aware of desire not as lust but as an intricate, slow-burning acknowledgement of mutual intrigue. At one point, a shared joke led to a moment of silence, our laughter fading into a comfortable stillness. I realized I was hyper-aware of their expressions, the gentle rise and fall of their chests, the faint warmth radiating toward me. Each of them carried a quiet, magnetic allure, strength tempered by vulnerability, confidence balanced with tenderness. By the time we left the cafe, the atmosphere had subtly shifted. Walking back toward the gym, or more accurately toward the point where our paths would diverge, I felt a profound awareness of how close we had come, emotionally, almost intimately, without crossing any line. A brief touch on my arm here, a lingering glance there, smiles that lasted just a second too long, each small gesture spoke volumes. I realized then that desire doesn't always need words or grand gestures. Sometimes it's the quiet warmth of presence, the electricity of shared space, and the magnetic pull of unspoken understanding. And in that moment, walking together through the cool evening air, I felt the slow burn of something inevitable, something delicate, charged, and utterly compelling. The evening had cooled into a soft, gentle night by the time we left the cafe. Streetlights glimmered on the wet pavement, casting a warm glow across the sidewalk as we walked together. There was a quiet rhythm to our steps, an unspoken understanding that none of us was rushing to leave, and yet all of us knew the time to part was approaching. They guided me toward my car with subtle ease, their presence both reassuring and intimate. The tallest woman walked slightly ahead, occasionally glancing back to make sure I was keeping pace, her soft brown hair catching the light with each movement. The green-eyed woman stayed close on my right, her posture relaxed yet poised, an invisible tether of awareness connecting us. The shy smiling woman mirrored my pace on the left, her gentle smile warming the space between us, her eyes bright with quiet amusement and sincerity. As we reached my car, the moment felt suspended, like the world had softened around us. The first gesture came from the brown-haired woman, a brief, deliberate touch on my forearm, her fingers resting lightly as if imprinting reassurance. It was fleeting, but enough to make my pulse quicken, a simple affirmation that our connection was mutual and tangible. The green-eyed woman leaned just slightly toward me, her hand brushing against my shoulder in a gesture of casual affection. The warmth radiated through me, a tangible reminder of the subtle intimacy we had built over days of shared workouts, quiet conversations, and lingering glances. It wasn't romantic in the overt sense, but it was deeply stirring, a language spoken through touch, presence, and shared awareness. Finally, the shy smiling woman offered a hug, delicate and comforting, her cheek pressing briefly against mine. It was soft, fleeting, yet heavy with emotion, leaving a lasting impression of warmth and trust. In that moment, the age difference, the unspoken tension, and the slow-burn attraction crystallized into something tangible yet entirely safe, a profound sense of mutual respect, admiration, and genuine connection. As they stepped back, we exchanged quiet words, teasing lightly about the gym routines, shared laughs lingering in the night air. I realized how fully I had been drawn into their world, their presence, their confidence, their subtle vulnerability. Each of them had left a mark on me, not just physically but emotionally, shaping an intimacy that was layered, slow-burning, and entirely human. I watched them walk away, their movements confident yet gentle, the soft sway of familiarity and warmth lingering behind them. I felt an unusual calm, a quiet satisfaction that comes not from conquest or romantic closure, but from genuine connection, the kind that respects boundaries, acknowledges age and experience, and thrives in shared understanding. Driving home, I replayed the evening in my mind, the touches, the glances, the laughter, the vulnerability. Each moment had built upon the last, and I felt a subtle, enduring warmth, a promise of continued connection, mutual care, and the possibility of something deeper in time. It wasn't just a story of attraction, it was a slow-burn narrative of human closeness, respect, and emotional intimacy, culminating in a moment that was tender, satisfying, and beautifully complete. The gym, once a neutral space of routine, had become a place of possibility, a stage for unexpected connection and subtle romance. And as I finally settled into the quiet of my apartment that night, I understood that some stories, slow and deliberate, leave their mark long after the final touch, the final glance, and the shared warmth of human presence. If you felt the tension, the warmth, and the slow-burn connection in this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more age gap romance tales. Share your thoughts in the comments, which moment made your heart race the most?